there are two things that EVs are notoriously bad at, and that is long distance driving and cold weather driving. Today, we're going to be putting both of those to the test and see just how bad or good, I guess, an EV can be in these conditions. First off, the reason that EVs are bad in cold weather is because the battery needs to stay at an optimal temperature while you're driving. So normally you would want all that energy from the battery going into pushing the car and actually moving the car down the road. But when it's super cold like it is right now, it is under 20 degrees here in Ohio, all that energy has to go into also heating the battery and keeping it at that optimal temperature. So not only are you pushing the car along, you're also trying to keep the battery at an optimal temperature because that is a very narrow range. Performance in cold weather is also affected by the nature of batteries themselves. Those colder temperatures lead to higher internal resistance, which means the battery is not going to perform as well. And that's why batteries do well in hotter temperatures, because the optimal temperature for a battery is around room temperature, which is around 70-ish degrees. As for road trips, the reason EVs aren't very good there is not because of the long distances. We've got batteries that are big enough now that can go 300 plus miles, if not more, but the speed at which you're going. So unlike gas vehicles, where gas vehicles are usually more efficient the faster you get because they have those gears and shift into higher gears when you're going faster to be more efficient, EVs don't have gears. There's no transmission. It's a single speed motor most of the time. So when you are traveling at those higher speeds, the motor is being put under more strain and it is using more energy per mile. So theoretically in my car, I could go really far on my battery if I was driving at like 25 miles an hour, but on the highway, you obviously can't do that. I'm traveling at like 70 plus, so that is much less efficient. Another reason EVs are less efficient at high speeds is just due to more drag. The faster you go, the higher the aerodynamic drag is on the car, and that in turn leads to less efficiency and a shorter range. And for those two reasons, that's why these vehicles aren't very good in cold weather and long distance trips. The plan for this trip coming up here is to travel to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Obviously very cold up there and far away from where I'm at in Columbus, Ohio. And currently we're sitting at the Polaris Supercharger to charge up before we head out. And the reason I am sitting here instead of just charging my car at home before we left on the trip is because I don't have a normal home charger. Actually, I'm just using a 120 volt outlet. So I unplugged that before we left, and my car had only gotten up to around 60%. So we're at the supercharger now, charging up, and I'm gonna walk through kind of our plan for the trip and where we're gonna stop. The nice thing that I love about Tesla is you can just plug in a destination. It basically does all the hard work for you. So if I plug in Sault Ste. Marie is where our first destination is in the UP, I plug that in and now it is showing all of the different stops we need to make on the way up there. So you can see we're gonna need to charge here for another 15 minutes, but as the trip continues, we're gonna have to make 3 stops on the way up to Sault Ste. Marie, and there is a supercharger up there as well if we zoom out. So you can see we'll make that stop in Maumee, we'll stop in Bay City, and then we'll make one last stop in Gaylord, Michigan. And if I turn on the charging filter, you can see there's actually a charger in Sault Ste. Marie. So I plugged this in on ChargeWay before I hopped in the car just to see how long it was going to be. And overall, I was planning on leaving my house around 7:30, and ChargeWay was estimating it would take around 10 hours to get up to Sault Ste. Marie. So puts us at around 5:30 p.m. arriving in Sault Ste. Marie. So we're going to see how accurate that is. I did leave my house at around 7:30. It's currently 7:51 and I'm sitting at the supercharger. This is really just a test of the car here, see how it does. Just put fresh winter tires on as well. So we'll see how those do and how efficient those are. And I also reset my trip odometer, so we'll be able to see how efficient the car is along the way. But yeah, I'm excited to see how this goes and see how the car holds up, because this will be the longest road trip I've ever taken in this car. And it'll also probably be the coldest road trip I've taken in this car, because I think it's supposed to get down to around 10 degrees, if not colder, up in Michigan. All right, we're here in Maumee, Indiana, making our first stop, and let's look on the touchscreen because we've got a fun alert here. So it actually comes up with this warning saying, I need to plug in because we're down to 15%, and it's actually warmed up a little bit, but we need to plug in immediately. And this is probably going to be our longest charging stop of the day. It's saying 45 minutes to continue our trip. Been driving for about 2 hours so far, so I definitely needed to stop. One thing did happen on the drive here that I thought was a little weird. My entire touchscreen froze. This is the first time it's happened while I've been driving, and for some reason it would not restart. So I didn't realize this, but you can actually reset the touchscreen while you're driving if you hold down on both of these buttons here. So the touchscreen completely froze. I was able to hold down on both of my steering wheel buttons and reset the touchscreen. Car didn't stop driving or anything like that. And one thing to remember is that there's multiple computers in the car. So there's one that controls the touchscreen. There's also one that controls all of the functions of the car. And these are separate. So if your touchscreen does die for some reason, that doesn't mean your car is dead or not going to start or not going to move or anything like that. So even when I reset the touchscreen, autopilot was still working. I could still drive the car, speed up, slow down, like all the normal car functions. So definitely something to keep an eye on, but not something really you need to freak out about if it does happen to you. So you can see this is already down to 40 minutes for this charging stop. And our next stop will be in Bay City, Michigan. And one of the big questions I get is like, what do you do on these charging stops? Isn't that just a waste of time stopping to charge? But honestly, like I said, I've been driving for 2 hours. I need to go use the restroom. I've actually got to get some work done as well. So these aren't completely like dead stops. I get stuff done during these trips. I don't necessarily just like sit here and play on my phone waiting for my car to charge. There's other stuff I can be doing, especially in this day and age where everything is connected and I can work from anywhere. So you can see my car is charging behind me here, and back behind me it is right next to a Meijer. We're a little bit far away though, which is one thing I don't like about some of these charging setups, is that they're not exactly close to a lot of amenities. There's also kind of a strip mall of some other restaurants right behind me here, but I usually like just going into the grocery store to grab some snacks or use the restroom, just because it doesn't feel as weird as just going into a random store to use the restroom. Okay, so we just got back from Meijer. I plugged in around 10:21, and it is now 10:43. So just from plugging in, getting a few video shots, and then walking into Meijer and coming back, already taken 20 minutes. So I've got about 20 minutes left to charge here. We're currently at 77 kilowatts, charging at over 300 miles per hour still. These are not V3 superchargers, but they're still pretty fast, and it doesn't really even matter at this point because my car is only pulling 76 kW. So gonna get some work done now and then be on our way to the next charging stop in Bay City. Okay, so I plugged in at the Bay City, Michigan supercharger here and been plugged in for a few minutes, plugged in around 1:20-ish. It's now 1:36. We've been here about 15 minutes. We've got 15 minutes remaining to charge. But if we take a look at our last leg of the trip, been averaging around 150-ish miles per leg and then charging for about a half hour or so each way, and then about 2 hours in between charging stops. So used a ton of energy, about 50 kWh on the way to this charging station, but our average energy was actually our lowest of the trip so far at 318 watt hours per mile. If you've seen any of my road trip videos before, you know that the average watt hours per mile for this Model 3 is around 260 watt hours per mile. So anytime we're above that, that means we're using more than rated range, means we're gonna need to charge more and need to stop more along long trips like this. Anyway, we left about 7:30 a.m. this morning. It's a little past 1:30 now, so little over 6 hours into the trip. So doing really well, and we've got about 4 hours remaining. It's estimating that we'll be arriving in Sault Ste. Marie around 5:30 p.m. So on track here. Got about 15 minutes left at this station, and then we'll be on our way. You know, one thing I think that's interesting that I get a lot of comments on is people saying that you have to go way out of your way to take long trips like this. And the fact of the matter is, this is the same route I would have taken in a gas car. This is the most efficient route up to Sault Ste. Marie, and all of these supercharging stops have been along that route. So I really haven't had to go out of my way for any of these charging stops, which has been awesome. They're really right off the highway. All right, we are all set to continue the trip now. And we've got an hour and 43 minutes, around 120 miles, to get to our next supercharging stop. So we just plugged in here in Sault Ste. Marie. We've got about 25 minutes here. Again, we're at another Meijer, so I'm gonna run in there real quick and grab a bite to eat and go to the bathroom as well. So we've got about 25 minutes here before we head to our destination in Sault Ste. Marie. And we're going really well so far. It was about a 2-hour drive to this station here. Let's look at how we did efficiency-wise on that last leg too. This was probably the least efficient leg of the trip. We're at 359 watt-hours per mile. And this is likely due to the fact that there were no other cars really on the road when I was driving to this supercharger along the highway. It was pretty much empty, no cars to coast behind. I was going 75 the entire time. So again, like I said at the beginning, speed and cold weather are two big battery drains. Weather's been awesome basically the whole way. No snow or anything. It's just been really cold. It's hovered around 25 to 30 degrees. And after we finish up charging here, we've got about another hour and 45 minutes to reach our destination. And I'm just going to stop at the Sault Ste. Marie supercharger so that I can charge up for the evening, since the hotel I'm staying at doesn't have charging. Okay, we've now got enough charge to continue the trip. And we are on our way to the final destination now. We have finally made it to Sault Ste. Marie. I hope I'm saying that right. I just realized on the drive here I might be saying that completely wrong. But we just arrived, about to plug in. We're at 14%, and it is dropped down to 16 degrees here. And it looks like these are V3 superchargers too, so we should get a pretty quick charge since we're all the way down. Okay, while that is throttling up, let's see our stats from that last leg of the trip. Okay, so that was even worse than our third leg there. So our average energy since that last charge was 378 watt-hours per mile. Definitely very inefficient. And you can see we're up over 1,000 miles per hour now on the V3 charger. Looks like we're getting close to the 250. And I'm gonna go ahead and adjust my charge limit down to 90% because I don't need the full 100%. We just need up to 90. And you can see our time remaining drops down to 35 minutes. So I'm gonna charge up to the 90% here, and then we'll head back to the hotel. All right, it is day 2 of the cold weather, winter frozen road trip here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Just spent the night here in this Best Western here in Sault Ste. Marie. Great accommodations here. And the car has held up pretty well. We ended the night with 89% of the battery. Overnight, it actually dropped to 83%, so we're at that right now. So we got to get the car warmed up and see if we can make it to Escanaba for our next stop. Should be a supercharger over there, so that is where we're headed. V3 supercharger, and that is where we want to go. So we'll go ahead and click that to get moving over there. And it looks like to make that trip, we're actually going to need to stop at the supercharger again just to charge up before we head over there. Probably because my battery is cold, as you can see from the snowflake over here. Okay, so we've got about 12 minutes till we can continue our trip here, and the reason for this is probably because when we put in the navigation over to Escanaba, it is saying we're only going to arrive with like 5 to 10% on our battery. Usually the Tesla navigation likes to leave you at least a 15% buffer for driving somewhere in case anything happens, or you end up using more energy than it's estimating. So with that buffer, it is telling us to stop and charge for a little bit, but once we're done here, we'll be good to go over to Escanaba. Got an interesting alert here too, because this supercharger is so close to where I stayed for the night. The battery is heating right now, so it hasn't even started charging. And you can see right here, it's not even pulling power yet. It just says to leave the cable connected, and it will start charging soon. Also, look at the size of these snowplow mounds that have been created. They're gigantic. I mean, there's a car, and then there's the snowplow. Crazy. Okay, we've been sitting here for about 5 minutes, and it still is only at 11 kilowatts. So typically around this time, I'm seeing, gosh, it's usually over 50 kilowatts I'm pulling, even at 83%. So this is super slow, and likely due to the cold and the fact that I didn't preheat my battery at all. So definitely recommend that you preheat before you come supercharge. Okay, so this is probably the worst supercharging experience I've had so far, and it's again likely because of the cold battery. But I plugged in at 9:13 and it's now 9:43. I've been sitting here a half hour, and my car has only added 6 kilowatt hours. So it's has never gone above 20 kilowatts, which is just insane. I'm currently at 90%. It should be pulling a lot more than this. Definitely need to preheat the car next time before I hop in and get the battery warmed up and stuff, because this is really slow. So we're almost done here. I'm about to unplug and make our way over to Escanaba. All right, so we just arrived at the Escanaba supercharger, and we are all the way down to 5% on the battery. So let's get plugged in here and see what our charge rate gets up to. And again, we're at the V3 superchargers here, so we should see pretty high rates. And you can see we've got the thinner cables here. You can hear the charger ramping up. And this is actually one of the stops on my trip, so I'm not really in a rush during this stop. So I'm gonna run in, use a restroom, probably grab a bite to eat as well. And we'll check in a little bit. Okay, so we plugged in, I plugged in when I first got here, and within 10 minutes, my car had charged up 40%. As soon as I got back to the car though, we've had some kind of charging error, so I'm trying to get that worked out, but when I plug it in, it's just immediately giving me an error. So you can see on the car here, we've got this little red light popping up, and then in the car, we're seeing this unable to charge error. So I'm just gonna move my car. I'm just gonna move my car to a different stall and see if that fixes the issue. Okay, so we were on stall 1C over there. We're now on 2A, so let's plug in here and see if this works. And it looks like it's working fine now. So that was weird, but I guess it happens sometimes. So like I said, I'm gonna chill here for a little bit. I don't have anywhere else to be after this. This is just one of the stops along my trip, so I'm gonna chill here for a little bit and get some work done for a couple hours and just let the car charge in the meantime. Also, the temperature has warmed up a ton, so that's been great. We haven't had to deal with the freezing temperatures anymore. It's sitting around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, so that has been a welcome change as well. One thing we will check is our efficiency so far. I unfortunately lost the time from our last charge since I had to move charging stalls, but so far our average energy consumption has gone down, so that is a good sign. That means we're getting more efficient as the trip is going on. You can see our average energy there was around like 350 at the end of yesterday. It's now down to 346. And we've traveled 700 miles already. Our charging is complete now. We just hit 100%. It looks like some more power might be trickling in, so we might sit here a little bit. But we are all good to go. I got some work done. I think total charge time here was around 45 or 50 minutes, but this wasn't really a stop to charge. This was more, I mean, I needed to charge, but but probably would have left sooner if it was just to charge. Since I was here to get some work done, I was able to get that finished. So we are all charged up now. The next leg of our trip is heading to the Mackinaw City Supercharger, and that is where I'm going to be staying for the night. So we'll just tap on that and go there. And we should have enough charge to make it over there. It's going to take us about 2.5 hours to drive over there. And before we hop in the car, look at how dirty my car is right now. This is easily the dirtiest it's been since I've owned it, and just disgusting all over the place. So definitely going to need a good wash once we get back home, because it is gross. But that is the trip so far. I will check in when we get over to Mackinaw City. All right, so we just arrived at the supercharger here. We're down to 23%, and the temperature actually has stayed pretty constant around 37 degrees. And we're about to plug in to this V3 supercharger here. This drive took about 2.5 hours, so not too bad. No charging stops along the way. That 100% we charged up to was plenty to get here. Let's check in on our efficiency real quick before I plug in. Just over 850 miles, and our average energy has dropped even a little bit more. We're down to 345 for our average watt hours per mile. So let's plug in here. Okay, so it looks like we're touching 250 there. I'm going to adjust my charge limit down to 90 again, since I don't want to sit overnight with 100% charge. And again, we're kind of in a similar situation to last night, where the hotel I'm staying at tonight does not have charging, so we're going to charge up here before leaving tomorrow. So this is my last overnight stay on this trip, and then I'm going to be heading home to drive back to Columbus tomorrow morning. Look at how just icy and frozen everything is out here. This is crazy. You see behind me, the lake is just completely frozen over. Even though it's close to 40 degrees, it is freezing out. So I'm gonna hop back in the car. It's been amazing along this trip because I'm in the Upper Peninsula, and basically everything is shut down for the winter besides a few shops, and most of the towns I'm driving through are just completely shut down essentially for the season, just because it's so cold and everything's covered in snow. So, but overall, I think the trip has gone really well so far. Didn't have any more issues today with battery temperature or anything. As you can see, when we plugged in here, we were pulling 250 kW. Temperature has also warmed up a little bit, so I think that's helping our efficiency. I haven't had any more issues with the touchscreen crashing at all either. Autopilot also has done surprisingly well. There's a lot of 2-lane roads on the drive to here, and usually I have a lot of issues with semis coming the opposite direction, but didn't have any issues with that really. So obviously this would have been better if I had charging at the hotel I stayed at last night and charging at the hotel I'm staying at tonight, because that trip to Escanaba was for a business thing and I needed to be there anyway. They had supercharging, so I just charged up there while I was getting some work done, and that wasn't a huge deal. It didn't really add time to my trip at all, and I wouldn't have even driven there in the first place and then have driven right back unless I needed to be there. So having the supercharging where I needed to go was definitely beneficial. So it is saying we've got about 30 minutes remaining here, so I'm just gonna find somewhere to go eat, and I'm also gonna see what tomorrow's trip is looking like. So I'll turn you around. So it's looking like, depending on how much we charge up here, we may be able to skip one of these supercharging stops, but I know we'll need at least 3 stops on the way home to make it all the way. But obviously we're gonna charge up here to 90%. We'll see if we need to stop here in the morning or not, because there's a chance that we might need to. All right, good morning. We are back in the car. I just went in and hopped in. I didn't want to record outside the car because it is freezing. The temperature has dropped down to 22 degrees, and this is our last day of the trip. We are headed home now. We left the car outside all night. I arrived at the hotel with around like 92%. I ended up just shutting Sentry mode off because that is a big battery drain, and we're currently at 90%, so we should have enough to get to this first supercharger, but let's plug it in and see. Okay, so it looks like we're gonna need 3 supercharging stops today. Clare, Michigan, which we haven't stopped at yet, Lansing, and then Maumee. So should be a pretty easy drive today. I plugged it in on ChargeAway last night to see what the actual trip would take, and it was looking like around 9 hours total, so 9 hours including charging. So we're gonna see how accurate that is. It's about 8:30 right now, and we'll check in at the first supercharging stop. Okay, so slight change of plans. We actually are stopped in Gaylord, Michigan right now. The car did some reconfiguring on the drive here and decided we actually needed to stop here. And there's a reason why. I was looking at the trips thing right here, and we've only traveled 62 miles since the last charge. We started with 90%, remember, and we're down to 51% already. So really inefficient driving, and you can see our average watt hours per mile, which is the highest we've seen on the trip so far, over 430 watt hours per mile. So just incredibly inefficient, and I think that's due to the fact that we essentially hopped right on the highway when we started, and it's been around 20 degrees the entire time. This is the coldest it's been when we've been driving on the highway. It warmed up kind of yesterday, so our efficiency was a lot better, but today has been really bad, definitely the worst we've seen. And we've got to sit here for about 30 minutes. I just plugged in, and our next stop will be in Bay City before continuing our drive. But good news is we're still going to have only about 3 charging stops. I think some of them will be longer than normal. Anyway, all that being said, our arrival time is still the same. We just had to make this stop a little bit sooner in Gaylord here. So we've only been traveling about an hour so far before making our first stop. And we're not down as low as we have been on a lot of the other charging stops. We were only down to 50%. So you can see we're not pulling a ton of energy right now either. We're not even at 100 kW in terms of charging speeds. And if you follow me on Twitter, you saw I posted this this trip, or the first leg of the trip, on Tuesday, and I got some questions asking about like how efficient has the drive been, like what's your efficiency, and a lot of people asking just about general range. And this is the reason I leave my car in percent, is because if I switch to that range number on the touchscreen here, it's showing we have 160 miles left, but we clearly are not going to get the rated range right now in this cold weather. It's just not going to happen. So leaving it in percent makes a lot more sense to me. Another cool thing you can see behind me here, we've actually got some Electrify America stations at this stop as well. So that's nice for other non-Tesla vehicles. Really cool. Okay, we've got enough charge to continue. We're at 92%. Just unplugged, so we're gonna get back on the road now, and I'll check in at the next supercharging stop. Okay, we just stopped at the Bay City Supercharger. Let's plug in. So on this leg of the trip, I actually tried something different. I slowed down a ton. So the speed limit was around 75 on the basically the whole route here, and you can see we traveled 123 miles, and our average energy went down to 336 versus the 430 that we had on the last leg of the trip. So slowing down is one of the best things you can do if you want to conserve energy, and that's what I was trying to do here and kind of illustrate that. The temperature has gone up by about 10 degrees, but that speed is a huge factor in how much energy you're using. So one thing you can do is just slow down if you do need to stretch out your battery a little bit more. This is going to be our longest charging stop for sure. 50 minutes it is saying here at this supercharger. Second charging stop, and you can see that we will need to stop at the Mackinaw supercharger as well for 45 minutes. Really long charging stops. Luckily I do have to get some work done like usual. And fortunately we're at another Meijer. So shout out to Meijer for having all these supercharging locations, because they're very convenient to run into and grab some snacks and stuff. Okay, so we just hit enough charge to continue our trip, and let's unplug. We charged up to 100%, which I think is wild to get to our next supercharging stop, but I think it's just to be super conservative, because we're not sure how cold it's going to be and how what kind of weather we might run into. So we're at 100%. We're heading to Mackinaw now, and I will check in when I get there. Also, what is that vehicle over there? Let me know down in the comments. Okay, just plugged in at the Findlay supercharger, not the Mackinaw supercharger, and a few things happened on the way here. So first off, as soon as I left again, the screen went black for like 5 minutes. I had to reset the touchscreen while I was driving, while I was on the highway, so I had no way to see my speed or anything like that. So that was annoying, but it's been working fine now. It's been a little laggy, but hasn't completely shut off again. Second thing, as soon as the touchscreen reset, the navigation kind of recalibrated and decided I had enough charge to reach all the way down to Findlay instead of stopping in Maumee. And these are actually V3 superchargers. So these have the faster charge speeds up to 250 kilowatts. We're only pulling 125 right now though, which is kind of odd, even though we're down under 10%. We only need to stop for 20 minutes instead of the hour it was going to be at Maumee to charge up enough to get back to Columbus. So that was a welcome change, and we're actually going to be home about 10 minutes earlier than originally predicted, so that's nice. And the third thing is we actually lost autopilot for about an hour on that trip. And if you follow Tesla at all, you know that they're switching to this vision system for autopilot, and mine is not a vision car. It still has the radar, and I was under the impression that they were no longer using the radar. However, on the trip here, you can see and can probably hear the rain. It turned into freezing rain for a moment there, and it got below 32 degrees, so the rain was essentially freezing as soon as it hit the car, and a bunch of ice built up on the front of the car, and I just recorded some on my phone, so I'll kind of splice that in here. But the whole front of the car was essentially covered in ice, and the radar wasn't able to work. It can't see through that little ice buildup, and autopilot shut off. It said autopilot wasn't available. I was like a little confused because I thought they were all on vision now, but apparently they are not, because it still needed that radar, and the radar was disabled because it was built up with ice. So we lost autopilot for about an hour. Anytime I drive without autopilot, I realize how valuable that really is. And again, part of the reason I got a Tesla was the supercharging network and autopilot are two huge factors that I love anytime on a road trip like this. So lost it for about an hour. But then it warmed back up, and that ice buildup started just falling off the car. so I was able to re-enable autopilot and continue driving. But another kind of weird thing that's happened on this trip, and definitely a reason to put some ceramic coat or something like that on your car so that ice doesn't build up, and you can hopefully avoid that in the future. I really got to go use the restroom, so I'm going to run and do that real quick, and we've only got about 13 minutes left on this charging stop, so a really quick one here before we head all the way back home. All right, we are finally back, and that was a sketchy drive. Scariest part is the rain started coming down super heavy. Luckily it wasn't snow, because I think that would have been a lot worse, but the rain was so heavy I couldn't see at certain spots. And of course, my screen froze again when the rain was coming down, and my wipers just refused to work without me manually pressing on the button on the steering wheel. So basically, the entire time it was raining, I had to keep pressing this to make sure the wipers kept moving, instead of actually just using the touchscreen here and setting them to something. Because the touchscreen was frozen, so I couldn't use that method. Had to reset this touchscreen, so couldn't see my speed, could not adjust the wipers the entire time it was pouring rain and poor visibility. So it was just a bad time all around there. Luckily, it reset pretty quickly. Again, it was like 3 or 4 minutes later, screen came back on. And then coming all the way north of Columbus, coming into town, you go under this little bridge. It was completely full of water under there. I saved the dash cam clip, so hopefully the footage is decent enough to show in here. Probably the most terrifying thing that's happened in this car so far, just because it literally looked like I was underwater. It was scary, and luckily there's nobody in front of me either, because I have a feeling they would have slammed on their brakes, and I probably could have rear-ended them while we were in that deep puddle there. The water literally came up over the roof of the car. It was crazy, like really scary. And again, I've got just 120 volts charging here, so we're gonna plug in and head upstairs and kind of recap the trip here. Before we head up, I do want to say the car itself held up extraordinarily well. Oh, just honked at us. It's actually got a little bit washed off now too, so it's not as dirty as it was. Still gonna need a car wash in the future though. Okay, so we're back upstairs. It's actually a few weeks after I completed that road trip. finally had some time to unpack and check out some more details from the trip and compile some data from it as well. So let's start with some stats from the trip. I've got my computer up in front of me here. Miles, we traveled 1,326 miles, and that is about the equivalent of driving halfway across the United States, so definitely covered a ton of ground here. We used 455 kilowatt hours. That's approximately 6 whole Model 3 batteries, at least the battery size that I have. In terms of efficiency, we actually did pretty well considering the situation. We used 343 watt hours per mile on average, and that equates to about a 30% range drop, or my range dropping to around 220 miles on a full charge. Total travel time, which I am defining as either actively supercharging or actively driving, added up to 27 hours and 15 minutes. So the time actively driving was 21 hours and 7 minutes, and the time actively supercharging was 6 hours and 8 minutes. As for the ratio of charging time to that total trip time, about 22.5% of the time was actually plugged into a supercharger. And a good thing to understand here is that we could have cut off about 2 hours and 12 minutes off of that time. So we started in Columbus, and because we could have charged up at home, that could have cut off a half hour at the Polaris charging stop. We could have cut off a half hour there. That whole first day we drove up to Sault Ste. Marie, and I charged for another half hour after we had arrived. And if my hotel had charging, we could have cut off time there. The same is true for Wednesday, the second day of the trip. We could have, if we were plugged in overnight, eliminated that charging stop before leaving Sault Ste. Marie, which took 35 minutes. Remember, it was super cold. We essentially were waiting for the battery to warm up the entire time. And then again, our stop in Mackinaw City, if we would have had charging at our hotel, we could have cut off about a half hour from Mackinaw City stop. And then on the last day, we actually did really well. We couldn't have really eliminated any charging stops on this leg of the trip because we had enough to leave the hotel in the morning, and I plugged in when I got home. So those 2 charging stops were essentially eliminated or didn't add any more time. As for total cost for the trip, total supercharging costs were $165.08. And the only really way to compare that to anything is actually just comparing it to gas. So I assumed that gas was $3.60 a gallon. It's definitely gone up since I completed this trip. And in a 35 mile per gallon car, this would have cost $140 to drive the same distance, which is actually cheaper than supercharging. So why is this? The main reason is because of just the inefficiency of the trip and that winter driving. Like I said earlier, my range dropped to around 220 miles on a full charge. So normally if I stop the charge and fill up my battery, I am now stopping more often and paying more because I've got to charge my battery up more to go less distance than usual. It's a very similar situation to driving an inefficient gas vehicle. If you've got a vehicle that only gets 15 miles per gallon, that's obviously going to be more expensive to fuel up and go the same distance as a vehicle that gets 35 miles per gallon. And again, it really depends on what you're comparing to here in terms of costs. I found the break-even point was around 30 miles per gallon. So if I did this trip in a car that only got 25 miles per gallon, then my Model 3 definitely would have been cheaper. And if I did this trip in the summer, it would probably be cheaper because my battery and my car is way more efficient when those warmer temperatures are out. So could I have done this trip quicker in a gas vehicle? Absolutely. I think gas vehicles are still going to be quicker on road trips, but I don't think the gap is as wide as people really think. And if you just look at my active driving time, it's still over 21 hours. And I know personally I would not want to be driving more than 7 hours every day. So in terms of actual time away from home and time to complete the trip in terms of days, I think doing this over 3 days is probably the most comfortable route to go, whether you're in a gas vehicle or an EV. Those charging stops definitely give me a much needed break, a time to relax, and time to enjoy the trip versus rushing and really pushing myself to get to a destination. So what did I miss here? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I appreciate you coming along with me on this trip. And let me know if you want to see more long form content, more kind of casual vlog style. This was a lot of work to make, but if it was valuable to you, then I am definitely willing to do it again. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.